Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living with Floods. I'd like to start by thanking the Iowa City Public Library and the Library Channel who are broadcasting this forum live tonight. I'd like to also thank all of you for being here and in advance thank our presenters who I'm going to introduce in a minute. We have the A-team from the local area, people that have been involved in the front lines for quite a long time, and they're going to present tonight. Almost 2 years ago, we began planning an effort to commemorate the 5th anniversary of the 2008 floods in a meeting that was organized by the College of Engineering, Hancher Auditorium, the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research, the Iowa Flood Center, the University of Iowa College of Education, and the State Hygienic Laboratory. And the focus was to, in terms of looking back, was to provide an opportunity to celebrate some of the success and some of the accomplishments around recovery and resiliency on campus and in communities in Johnson County. Also to raise awareness about the need to continue to stay focused on more recovery work that continues to be underway, and really the unfinished business that's in front of all of us as we look at creating more resilient communities from the kinds of extreme weather that Iowa increasingly is experiencing. And so we wanted to do a series of community programs, so we started by selecting a series of communities, including Des Moines, Council Bluffs, Muscatine, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Iowa City, and Dubuque. And with the involvement of Hancher Auditorium, in addition to community forums like this, we thought it would be great to try and think about how to bring the arts into this celebration. And there's flyers on the back. I'll just give it a quick plug. We identified the Preservation Hall Jazz Band as a band associated with certainly flooding disasters in New Orleans to come to Iowa for 10 days to play a series of free concerts in each of the communities I mentioned. And that's going to be kind of the capstone of a bunch of work that's gone on. The free concert in Iowa City will be Saturday, June 15th at 4 p.m. on the Pentecrest. In addition to the Preservation Hall Jazz Band coming to play these free concerts, there was an effort to try and engage young people in science education, and there's been actually since in the last number of months 5 STEM festivals held in communities across the state. Last fall there was a Teachers Institute led by the College of Education to bring middle school science teachers to Iowa City to learn about flood curriculum and go back into their communities and work with students. Tonight is the 5th community forum that we are hosting in communities around the state. We were in Muscatine last week and Des Moines a couple nights ago, where community leaders came together to talk about the progress made in their communities to deal with flooding, and of course the 7 concerts that are coming up. We have a series of brief presentations tonight, starting out with Larry Weber, the director of IIHR, Hydrosciences and Engineering, co-director or co-founder of the Iowa Flood Center. The Iowa Flood Center was created after the 2008 floods to give communities some new flood fighting tools and the expertise of IIHR. And so with that, I'd like to invite Larry up. The other presenters will follow will be Rick Foss. He's a Public Works Director from the City of Iowa City. Ellen Hobble, who is the Assistant City Administrator for the City of Coralville. And then we're really happy to have here Rob Leonards. He's the Director of Planning, Design, and Construction. As we planned this over the last couple of years, we never really anticipated that we would be the week or two of the final push to have the band here, that we'd be in the midst of major flooding. The event tomorrow night, the Preservation Hall Jazz Band kicks off this tour, and we were supposed to be at the Simon Estes Outdoor Amphitheater on the Des Moines River, but it got flooded a few days ago, and it's not available to us. So they're going to be playing actually inside at a venue in Des Moines. So it's kind of poignant. We're here tonight. We're going to learn a lot about the recovery work that's gone on in our community and look at some of the things ahead. So with that, I turn it over to Larry.
Great, thanks, Joe. I'm going to try to use my 10 minutes tonight, and again, part of what we're doing in this event is thinking back to 2008 and the challenge that we all faced in 2008, and talk a little bit about where we've come since that point, and then think a little bit towards the future. And most certainly in 2008, for those of you that were here and quite active and involved in the flood fight, the flood fight was one of real yeoman's work. There was a lot of work towards sandbagging different critical infrastructure and facilities around the community. And I remember the call, that went out, especially on the university campus, for volunteers. And the call would go out and we would get, not dozens or tens, but it seemed like hundreds or thousands of volunteers to show up at sandbagging locations. And they would become very active, and someone would point at a building or a facility and say, let's start to sandbag around that particular unit. And by the time you would look away and look back again, all of a sudden there was a stack of sandbags maybe 6 or 8 feet high. And so the challenge really became trying to put those folks to the proper use. And at that time, the city of Iowa City and Coralville and the university were trying best to understand exactly where the forecasted crest of the river would result in terms of extended inundation. And we had several consultants in the area that were putting together ad hoc models. The hydraulics lab was involved in making estimates. And we simply didn't have the types of tools available at that time to really guide those protective measurements, as well as perhaps we could have, or as well as we certainly do today. And so after the event, as the communities started to think about recovery, and the university was involved in a major recovery effort of its own, we met as a group of leaders in the area. And one of the comments that I made early on, and it seemed like it resonated pretty well throughout that period, was, we have one river that flows through Coralville, Iowa City, the university, and Johnson County, and we should have one model. And so that led an effort of the hydraulics lab going out, collecting river bathymetry data. Ayers and Associates was already becoming involved in our university recovery efforts. We looked to them to develop a simple one-dimensional HEC-RAS model to use in that recovery effort. And the hydraulics lab then became the custodian of that model, and then has further developed our own two-dimensional depth average models to help in that modeling and recovery effort. And of course, later in the fall and going into the next legislative session, through conversations with corridor legislators, including Senator Bolcom, we had the opportunity to submit a proposal to the General Assembly to form and establish the Iowa Flood Center. And so Vitek Krajewski and I wrote that proposal. We founded the Flood Center. And what I wanted to do tonight is just demonstrate, the one simple tool that we have here for the Iowa City, Coralville, and University communities within our Iowa Flood Information System. Most of the people in the room, I'm sure you've been to the Iowa Flood Center site. If you've been there, then you've undoubtedly been to the Iowa Flood Information System. We do have a nice state overview, and I like to put that up just to see what things look like. And of course, from a state perspective, things are still charged up out there. And as we do interviews and have discussions here in this past week, folks are starting to breathe a sigh of relief, and when they make that comment, I ask them to exhale really slowly because we're still charged up, and the reservoir, is just now cresting. We're very fortunate in the reservoir cresting about 3.5 feet or so below the spillway crest, but it's going to remain high, and the Iowa River discharges will remain high for the better part of 7 to 10 days as we try to build back flood storage out in Coralville. During that period, if we do experience rainfall, of course, we're very susceptible downstream from the reservoir to Clear Creek flooding, which could certainly be more of a flash flood rather than the large, long-wave river flooding that we have experienced here over the last couple weeks. But if we want to look at the flood maps, we can launch our flood map interface. You'll note here that I believe, what did we get to? 12 now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. We have 11 published community-based maps. We have a couple other mapping projects that are in progress that should be available just over the next couple of weeks. Makokata is a project that's queued up, and Sioux City as well. But if we look at Johnson County or Iowa City, we can load the Iowa City maps. And this gets back to the one river, one map concept. The current stage reading, 24 foot 11 inches, I think the forecast was about 25 foot 1 inch and 25 feet, and so we might be just coming off of that a bit. But with 24 feet 11 inches, we'll go to 25 feet, and we can look at the extent of inundation for that particular level. And again, the most heavily impacted area is the Iowa City Park area. Dubuque Street, of course, has water on it. And so we're able to demonstrate the extent of the inundations. As we zoom in, because this is all built on a Google Maps platform, transitions from the terrain layer, simple terrain layer, to the satellite imagery. And so folks have found this quite useful. We have been out over the last 5 years, demonstrating this to every service club that would have us or invite us. Seems like I've had every noon Rotary luncheon and lunch that's available across the state. I've eaten at just about every ice cream shop in Iowa. So we've been touring around quite a bit, but nothing really has helped people find out the utility and experience the utility of not only these mapping products, but the stream gauge information than this last event, where our system's been tested. We track how many people go to the system, and to say it's gone up by a couple orders of magnitude is probably pretty reasonable. The load on the system has been tremendous over the last couple days, and it's kept up quite nicely. So we've heard reports from all throughout Iowa of people going to the website, finding useful information from business owners to homeowners to community leaders, and have been very delighted about that. We were also involved in a couple media events here following the Johnson County EOC meeting, and when we did speak with the local media in that event, encouraged them to share the Iowa Flood Center website with their readers or listeners to get the word out so folks would go there and find the information and try it and use it. And I know several of the news media have used it. I had a chance, I was just watching the news about a week ago as the flood was developing in Cedar Rapids, and one of the channels we did a live on-air demonstration of the mapping capabilities in Cedar Rapids, and felt very proud that it worked well there, and of course we'd gotten a lot of response from that. So one river, one map still holds true. Not to bring back memories that are too painful, but if we just remember back to 1993 when we were in about the 28,000 CFS range, or going back to 2008 where the river crested at just greater than 41,000, we start to remember what the extent of the inundations looked like during that period. I had a chance to meet with some folks today, and during that discussion reminded them that just in this year's event in 2013, the Marengo gauge, which is the last gauge before the Iowa River enters the Coralville Reservoir, had peaked out at around 40,000 CFS this year. So I don't remember, I hadn't looked exactly, but remember about 40,000 CFS going into the reservoir, and we crested just below 20,000 in the Iowa City area. So the Coralville Reservoir did a tremendous service to the community downstream by attenuating that flow. And so we're very happy with that. We just hope for a good dry period here over the next 5 to 7 or 10 days so we can build back a little more of that flood storage out in Coralville that's so important to all of us. So with that, that is the essence of the remarks that I wanted to make tonight. I would pass the podium over to Rick Foss. Hopefully there'll be good questions at the end of our session.
Thank you, Larry. In just a moment here to get my presentation up. There we go. Well, this is a picture that I took on Monday. When we began planning for this 2 years ago, I really didn't envision that we'd be using imagery that we assembled the week of, but we are. And this is looking at Lower City Park. You can see Park Road Bridge on the left, and this is Dubuque Street on the right. It's a panoramic view. But it really drives home this point of living with floods. And it's the unfortunate nature of our community that we live in here. And, so it begs the question, how do we live with these floods? How do we build a more resilient community? So that, the specific underlying question for Iowa City is, what are our strategies for living with floods? And when you sort through the things that we're doing, it really falls into three categories for what we're doing. Remove, protect, and prevent. Removing a risk from the floodplain is really the only 100% effective means of eliminating that risk of flooding. So that's one of the areas of emphasis that we've had. Protect, we can't remove everything, so we make an effort to protect to the extent we can things that remain in the floodplain. And perhaps most importantly, we work to prevent future uses from going into the floodplain that are going to add risks for future generations and future liabilities. So let's take a look at the details of how Iowa City is implementing those three strategies. And what I'll do is in the next 9 minutes or so is go through each of these projects and just highlight them for you. And let's lead off with that 100% effective category, and that's removal. We're investing about $82 million toward this goal. And the first project is the buyout program, the residential buyout program, which is complete. We have used all the state and federal money that is available to us. And we purchased 94 homes right in there. And it's represented by all the green spots that you see here in Parkview Terrace, as well as along Taft Speedway. We'll talk about this purple area later. You'll notice as we started to deconstruct these homes out there that there's just nastiness within the walls there that contributed to our decision not to relocate any of these homes. If we purchased them, we demolished them. Moving on to our next project, which is our largest capital project related to the flood mitigation, is the relocation of our north wastewater plant. It is squarely within the floodplain of the Iowa River here, and we are removing it from that, and we are expanding the south wastewater treatment facility in a project that's just a little over 50% complete right now. By April, the end of April of next year, we should be fully operational and we can take that north plant offline and we no longer have that vulnerability there in the Iowa floodplain. The other project in the removal category has to do with our animal shelter. And that is moving the animal shelter out of the floodplain and getting it to a location where we don't need to worry about moving it during times of future floods. So let's move into that next strategy, and that is to protect. We've got 5 projects there totaling about $54.4 million, and we'll just step through those. The first one is the West Side Levee, and this is a project we just awarded. Construction has not started on it, but this will protect the Bacchus and Thatcher mobile home courts down there. The Bacchus court has actually sold and is now owned by Kohl's. So if you hear it referred to as that, you'll know what we're talking about. And it also protects an area along Commercial Court down there, the number of businesses that exist in that area. That's about a $4.7 million project. The next project is the Gateway project, which is our second largest flood mitigation project. And this provides protection for in a couple of ways. First of all, it protects Dubuque Street by elevating it along the corridor there between Foster Road and Park Road, a little bit south of Park Road, which is our lowest and most vulnerable arterial street, and it is also our primary link between downtown and Interstate 80. So that's a very important link for us. It's underwater now. We hope to see it again toward the end of June. The other part of this project will replace the Park Road Bridge, and which you see in this picture and is located down here. That bridge was observed to produce about 14 inches of backwater during the last flood. So the new bridge will be both wider and higher than the old bridge to eliminate that backwater situation. So that will provide added protection for upstream properties because we can reduce future flood peaks by doing that. Next project is a hard one to show you because they're all underwater. We had 2 water crossings and 3 sewer crossings underneath the Iowa River that after the flood had been scoured to the extent at which those pipes were exposed. And one of the sewer pipes was actually broken. And we spent about $1.6 million replacing all 5 of those pipes and putting them lower and well underneath the Iowa riverbed so that we are less vulnerable to future floods there. Next is the flood protection for our well houses. for our water supply. Our water plant sits high on the hill. It's well out of the floodplain, but our well houses are down into floodplain because that's where the water is. That's where we go to get it. In 2008, it took significant effort of sandbagging both the well houses and the power supplies to keep those in operation during the floods. And what we have done is we have elevated the electrical supplies, and we have fortified the buildings so that they can withstand the water against them. And this is our only preparation that was necessary for the flood that we're experiencing right now. We put some plastic around the building so that if there's a prolonged period of water contact, that the limestone won't soak up as much. But other than that, we're ready to go and in a good position there. Our last protection project is the Rocky Shore Drive lift station and floodgate. And that's part of a comprehensive collaborative project with the city of Coralville. I think there are 5 projects in total that add up to roughly $24 million that will protect this area south of the river and south of Clear Creek. And our part of the project is putting in a floodgate so that we can seal off this opening underneath the railroad, and also putting in pumping capacity so that we can deal with the internal drainage that comes from local rainfalls, as well as seepage that comes underneath the railroad tracks. Before this area flooded in 2008, we had all the pumps going that you can see there, and that was not enough to keep up with that. We really need a large-scale lift station to deal with that. Moving on finally into the prevention strategies, there's really 2 aspects of this. One has to do with policy, and the other has to do with purchase. And it's important to remember that all flood mitigation isn't bricks and mortar. Policy can be a very important part of that. And Iowa City is one of 2 communities in the state that regulates to the 500-year flood elevation. And more aptly, that's referred to today as the 0.2% flood hazard area. That is an area that has a 0.2% chance of flooding in any given year, not that there's a 500-year gap between each flood. So that's an important step for us for preventing future damages. Let's move on and look at open spaces in floodplains that we've been working on since actually the 1993 flood. We have the Peninsula Park that exists that we spent about $630,000 acquiring after the 93 flood. That accommodates our primary well field for our water supply system, as well as a dog park and a Frisbee golf course, and just a lot of great open space for the community. We also have the Showers Addition that we bought out after the 2008 flood, which is in the space between the Iowa River and our Terry Two Blood recreation area. And it also extends north off this map a little bit. So that's another area that we were able to purchase and prevent from future development. And then finally, the purple area that's shown here along Taft Speedway, which is conveniently located next to Terrell Mill Park for us and may someday be a part of that park, was another purchase that we made of $649,000. Over the years, Iowa City had seen a variety of development proposals for this site. Fortunately, it did not develop before we had the opportunity to purchase it. So the next question is, how are we doing on our process toward implementing these strategies? And what I'm showing here in color coding, and I'll let you buzz through these projects on your own in the interest of time. The green projects are complete. The yellow projects are under construction, and the red projects are in the design phase with construction coming up. And I will point out one that's very close to being bid is the Rocky Shore Drive lift station and floodgates. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ellen.
I'm sorry, this is a different version than I have.
Here.
Where's this thing?
Just go down right
Oh, down there. Okay, thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming so much. You know, things aren't that different in Coralville than in Iowa City, I guess. You know, we're in this strange place where we're still dealing in some ways with the 2008 flood. We're addressing this current flood, and at the same time having this retrospective, we've been taking lots of calls from reporters about how are things different, how are things the same, what are you dealing with, and it's all very interesting. I have a few pictures here just of the flooding that we dealt with in 2008, and I think that it's just particularly good to look at and remember how widespread it was in Coralville, and a lot of that is the function of what Larry Weber talked about, that we have not only the Iowa River, but we also have Biscuit and Clear Creeks as well, and so that gives us quite a bit to deal with. This intersection in particular is the busiest intersection in Johnson County. It sees about 110,000 cars per day, and I believe it had about 4 to 8 feet of water in it. Heartland Inn, of course, too, you know, just really these businesses along Highway 6. And of course, since Coralville developed along the waterways, it, you know, all these businesses are right there along the river, and so important to our development and our vitality. This is the Old Town Hall on 2nd Avenue. This is one that was flooded by the creeks. This is going to be relocated as a part of a project we have coming up that I'm going to tell you about. This is our transit facility, which had 6 feet of water in it. It was built prior to the flood maps being drawn, and over the years we had installed some types of flood protection. We had sandbagged, of course, quite a bit over time. This is on auto advance. Is there anybody who can help me with that? This is what our flood protection looked like in 2008, by and large, sandbagging. And we did have so much tremendous help from volunteers, as some other people referred to. It was, we did everything we could to help that. And that was, had it not been for a couple of really disastrous days that those of us who participated in this, and we're talking about earlier, you know, June 12th was a Thursday, and Friday the 13th lived up to its name. And so we were all dealing with that. Also in Coralville, after the flood of '93, we had done some protection at that time. We protected to a level of about 1 foot above the 100-year flood. And we had added some stormwater pump stations. We had made some improvements to the Clear Creek Channel. But of course, you know, the 2008 flood was really just a different level entirely. We did evacuate 310 households in 2008. 400 households were affected and 200 businesses. So, you know, Coralville certainly dealt with a lot that year. So we also, we tried to get some data. We took a lot of elevations at that time. We looked at where the water went, at what release of flow from the reservoir. That was really helpful to us this time. We went back and looked at that and said, okay, when we get to 15,000, this is where we're going to be, and this is where we need to protect. So here we are now, and this year there were a lot of things we didn't have to worry about, and that was certainly a blessing. I can't say that there was nothing we had to sandbag, but we did have a lot of improvements in place, and it made our work, we were able to focus on the areas that were vulnerable. This is one of the first things we needed to do, was our parks operation, parks maintenance, transit maintenance, and their office facilities were on 3rd Avenue. They were quite flooded, 6 feet of water. FEMA said they could not go back there. So they are today in an office off of 10th Street, just south of the interstate. They're high and dry, and they're very happy. That was an $8 million facility that we received FEMA funding, as well as some state funding and local funding. This area in particular, if you remember Edgewater Drive, that would have been flooded at about 13,000 CFS from the Coralville Reservoir, which we would have reached early last week. And because of FEMA buyouts, we did not have to deal with that this time, and we were able to build a berm along that place, which is now protection for an entire area. 1st Avenue Bridge over Clear Creek, we were able to access $27 million in iJobs funds. Thank you to the senators in the room. which allows the bridge is now longer and wider. It allows the creek to flow under and get to the river more quickly, which certainly allows improvements there. And also reconstruction of First Avenue from the creek up to 6th Street. If you travel First Avenue to get to work, which many people do, it is a real improvement. We have a little more work to do on First Avenue, but that's, everyone appreciates the 5 lanes there. Along with that, there was a lot of storm sewer work that really, had it not been for this work, First Avenue would have been underwater this year. The Crandit Corridor project, this is one that we're still working on, but it did work this year. It's not finished. This is a really big project. The railroad, if you remember, runs along First Avenue and then takes a turn with the river behind the Heartland Inn on Highway 6. And in 2012, on that Thursday, June 12th, the river went under the railroad embankment. The embankment's always kind of served as a levee, even though it's not necessarily intended to. So you can see there on the upper left where the river went through underneath. And that's when really all the protection, the sandbagging we had done for 10 days really was lost. So, we said, let's make that better. So you can see now the new bridge. This is a little hard to see, but this is the new bridge. It's a little bit like what we did on the First Avenue. So this is the old bridge. So you can see how much more quickly Clear Creek's going to be able to go through there and get to the river and not back up. It had a damming effect. We're also raising the embankment and getting rid of the ballast and putting in clay fill that's going to be engineered to hold the water back. There are also berms and walls associated with that. This is one of those projects that Rick was talking about that is associated with what they're doing on Rocky Shore Drive. It also includes Iowa River Power Restaurant. I'm sure you're all familiar with Iowa River Power pedestrian bridge. It's a great place to watch the river. Really popular over this last weekend, I noticed. And so then it's also going to include a walkway on the river side of the restaurant, and that will include some flood walls there too. So what that did for us was it put us in a much better position this year. We have since 2008, we've completed or are in the process of putting in over $60 million of flood protection. And we've had great success and great luck and great support with CDBG grants, iJobs grants, Economic Development Administration. So this year, we used about 3,000 feet of temporary sandbags. We use some tubes. We use the HESCO barriers that they also use, I know, at the University of Iowa. I want to back up one more. There's a lot more I could tell you about the flood walls and berms and stormwater pump stations we've put in. They all do their job. They aren't particularly exciting to some of us, but they're doing their job and they saved us this year. We didn't have flooding on Highway 6, 4th Avenue, or 1st Avenue, and we certainly would have had it not been for this protection. If you look at the drawing on the left, all of the blue areas are complete. They're areas that we have protection in place. And then the yellow areas are those that we identified that we are still working on protection. And basically one of the main ones was the south side of Clear Creek. So we did need to deploy some of these sand tubes along there to protect all those businesses as well as Highway 6 itself. So the last thing I'd like to talk about is Old Town. Old Town is an area that we use city funds to buy out. It's the area, it would be west of 1st Avenue, north of Clear Creek, and east of Biscuit Creek, south of 5th Street. And it's about 12 acres. We use city funds, so we are allowed to redevelop it. We're going to redevelop it at 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain. And last year we issued an RFP for redevelopment. We had 2 proposals and we selected the Watts team for redevelopment. They're working with Fusion Architects and it's under consideration by the City Council right now. what they're proposing, you can see here on the left, we've got about 12,000 square feet of commercial space, some multifamily buildings, and then some townhomes that will complete the space, about 140 units total. And included in that project is they will be building the berm on the north side of Clear Creek. That's one area that we still do not have flood protection in. And along with that, a trail, and there will be a 2-acre park in the area as well. And they're going to get started on that just as soon as we have approval from the City Council later this summer. And then we'll have buildings complete in 2015. So that's one of the bright spots that has come out of the flood. Certainly it's hard for those that can no longer be in their homes. It's also something that we can say that they're in a safer place. And from that now we're going to have a new development. So I appreciate all of the support we've had from FEMA and the legislature to do the projects we've done. It's certainly made dealing with this year's flood event much easier. So next we have Rod Leonard from the University of Iowa. They have just a few projects going on.
Thanks, Alan.
Excuse me.
Good evening. I appreciate seeing the work that Ellen and Rick have shared and the hard work that our communities have endeavored to take hold of and succeed with over the last 5 years. It's amazing, I think, for all of us and many in the community to realize just how fast 5 years can go by, even though the 2008 floods until this year seemed a distant memory to many. It's come back like a flood this spring, and I think it makes poignant the fact that we were going to come here and talk about where we are with respect to recovery from the 2008 flood. These floods are testing us. They're testing us again and helping us to understand the importance of the work that we're doing to recover our campus. So I thought what I would do is summarize for you the status of the University of Iowa's efforts in recovery and talk a little bit about lessons learned as we look forward to future years and certainly this year's challenges. To put us all on the same page, and you know, when we listen to Larry talk about the work the Hydraulic Institute did, the top program in the entire country, at our aid and on our site in the aftermath immediately after this flood hit, and then the Flood Center, which has served as a great resource for all of us, but statewide. This is an example. We use inundation maps all the time in communicating what we went through and where we were in 2008. And this gives you a sense for the buildings along our campus. And obviously the challenge for us was the great collection of notable buildings and large buildings and facilities in the midst of the Iowa River Valley as it passed through our campus, making our campus unique and special, but having us realize just what a river can do to us. You can see some of the bullet points made here. To date, we have expended about $250 million in flood-related costs related to the 2008 flood. That includes the cleanup. It includes all of the interim solutions the university had to take and put into place immediately after the flood and in the year following that to make sure all of our academic programs were in a good place in bringing in a record number of students in the years following the flood. The total is $900 million in that ballpark for total impact related to the 2008 flood. So we've got a ways to go, but we're hitting an important period in this recovery because, as is the case with any major or minor project, the majority of cost comes when you're in construction, not during the design portion. And many of our projects, as I will describe, are headed to the construction phase. Some of the projects that are underway or have been complete, I've indicated some of our recovery projects. First, Art Building West, which was completed in 2002, is an interesting story in that it was noted and was recognized and awarded not only nationally but worldwide, and 2 years later was under 4 feet of water. In fact, still getting international awards as it was under 4 feet of water. Interestingly enough, that high level of architectural quality in the design of that building helped aid the permanent recovery for this building. FEMA's initial intent in protecting each individual building was to wrap concrete around the base of this building and fortify it against any future floods. However, the FEMA 106 Environmental and Historic Group came in to analyze all of the buildings on our campus that were impacted and judged different buildings on their capacity for or eligibility for historic consideration. It usually starts at 50 years of age that a building can be considered, or if there are cultural or historic events or people associated with the building. In this case, the FEMA historians judged this building eligible for historic consideration after 2 years. And the reason was, they stated, it was so evident by its acclaim and its award that in 48 years, this building would represent the highest end of architecture for this period, that they considered it important now. That allowed us to move forward with a project that would maintain the architecture of the building as it was designed and construct what we call an invisible wall. Some are calling it a vanishing wall, but ultimately it's not very invisible there. When put in place, it creates a 900-foot barrier around the entire site, and it is in place right now. Interestingly enough, this year, as our flood emergency plan was put into place with the threats that came this last week, we began to assemble this wall according to that plan. It was expected to take 5 days. It took 3 days. The pieces and parts that put this together came together very nicely and fortify the building against any flood threats as they may come. We're hopeful that it is a careful effort that isn't needed this year, but it will remain there until we're certain that that's the case. It is the first of our projects to go all the way through the FEMA process for recovery and obligation, and then ultimately the construction of that project. The students were back in the building. We've closed it for the summer, but they'll be back in the building this fall. The Iowa Memorial Union, a rendering here showing what will be a quite different solution, where we will put a permanent wall. You can get a sense in the rendering. This is the riverside of that building, and that would represent the flood wall. It's not just on the west side of the building. It wraps around the entire building, and then we will rebuild the lower level. We'll be bidding that project later this summer, and we'll be complete with construction in early 2015. Its next door neighbor, the Iowa Advanced Technology Laboratories building, another building FEMA saw as important, and as such, it's another building that will employ the invisible wall technology to protect this building. We in fact just this week received Board of Regents approval for the budget on that project, and will advance a project there in the coming 2 years to permanently repair the building and protect it with the invisible wall. The building is being utilized, and even this year with the waters nearby, we have fortified the building so that we continue with the important research that goes on in that building, and it is being used as we speak. Across the river, the theater building, built in 1937, the arrow denotes a new level that will be added to the top of this building, top level, for a mechanical electrical penthouse space that will enclose the relocation of mechanical electrical systems from the lower level to the upper level of this building, so that even if the building takes on water, we can keep the all-important mechanical and electrical systems working within the building. A big part of what we learned in 2008, when the buildings had no air circulation within them. The project will not fund a complete protection of that building from floodwaters. It's not cost effective in FEMA's eyes, and as such, we're going to protect the systems in the building. And then I'll mention quickly the power plant. It's our lifeblood for our campus. It closed down, shut down in 2008, 2 a.m. on June 14th, when we had 22 feet of standing water in that building. It was at that point this campus went black, and it is ultimately important that it is protected. It is fully operational now, but still susceptible to major 2008 stage flooding. We have protected it to the levels that we need this year, but we're still working through very difficult issues with FEMA and appeals with FEMA to be able to fund the ultimate permanent protection of that building. And then finally, back to the map for what we would refer to as our 3 lost buildings. 2 of them have a different story than the third, and I'll talk about each of these projects. First, our art building. The lower left-hand corner shows the art building as it was built in 1936. It was the first building on the arts campus. Many additions since then, and you can see what it looked like in 2008. The FEMA historians did require that we protect the original 1936 portion of this building, but we will be removing or raising all of the additions that surround it in the coming months. We'll start that project later this summer, as long as we can get all of our barriers that surround the building out of its way. In the meantime, we are replacing the square footage for that program up the hill, and on the rendering that the site plan that I'm showing on the right-hand side, here's Art Building West that we spoke about, Riverside and River Street. The new building up the hill, safely away from any flood risks, will go in this direction to the north and to the west. A study model for this building is being designed by the same architect who designed Art Building West, Stephen Hull, in partnership with BNIM Iowa. You can see the model for the building and then the rendering for the building. We actually just bid this project this last week. The bids came in under budget, which is a good thing. We're doing so much work. We're in the midst of a 18-month period where the University of Iowa is bidding roughly $1 billion worth of construction. And one of our concerns is frankly, human capital, to have enough contractors to do all of the work that we have. In this case, the project, the largest single bid for flood recovery on our campus, came in at just under $50 million construction bid, and was below the estimate. So this project will move forward and we'll be complete with it in 2016. The second loss in the lower left-hand corner, Hancher Voxman Clapp, 300,000 square foot facility, the Performing Arts Center to the north and the School of Music to the south. FEMA recognized that the building could not be replaced on our campus on one site because of its size, and allowed us to split the two programs into two different sites. The School of Music is going to go to a dramatically different site at the corner of Burlington and Clinton Streets. We're just now staging the demolition of the two former branch banks that sit on that site and will allow us to begin construction. This is a rendering of the building as it will sit in 2016 when complete. We've already begun to bid packages, but we'll continue to bid packages for this project through the fall, or into the fall, and then we'll continue on with construction. LMN Architects out of Seattle, working with Newman Munson in Iowa City, are the lead architects for this project. Another rendering of the project at its entry at the corner of Clinton and Burlington Streets. We see it as a transformational project to recover our School of Music, but also for downtown Iowa City. The School of Music offers as many as 400 performances a year, students, faculty, visiting scholars, and most of those are free, and most of those were not known about by the general public in its former location. Now in the heart of Iowa City, we believe it's a difference maker all around. And then the one that often garners the most public attention, the replacement of Hancher. Moved to the north of its current site. The building has actually, the first packages have been bid and we have started construction. You can see the construction fencing in place and are well underway. We're expecting completion of this project. Here are some study models showing what that building will look like. Caesar Pelly is the architect, Pelly Clark Pelly out of New Haven, Connecticut, working with OPN Architects out of Cedar Rapids to complete this project. It is the largest of our replacement projects, a rendering from across the river of the building with the Levitt Center in the background. And finally, our Museum of Art. This is a more difficult task for us in that, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner, a $500 million art collection was on an island. Actually, we were able to get all of the art collection out of that building before the floodwaters came. But there's no doubt, and it became evident, that our art collection cannot be insured if put back into that site, into that building. At the same time, the damage to the building was not at a level that tripped the 50% rule for FEMA, saying that the building should be replaced, and as such, the only thing they will do is repair the building. Just this week, we received Board of Regents approval to move forward with two projects. One, to construct a new Museum of Art, to bring our art back to our campus. A majority of it is being stored and viewed by the public at the Figge Museum in Davenport. But a second project to recover the former museum, to be reprogrammed for other academic needs on our campus. So we'll run both of those projects. The recovery will be in partnership with FEMA. The new museum will be non-federalized and will be our responsibility. And that's a tough task when we start with a project at zero and move forward from there. But we've got a lot of creative and committed people to this endeavor, and we will be advancing projects that will include partnerships and all kinds of creative opportunities for us to bring the arts collection back to our campus and to our community. It would be remiss if I didn't show a couple of shots from this year. There are lessons, many lessons to be learned from 2008, and it was a very different environment when we were hit with the floods of 2008. I think to many, though there were a lot of people working exceptionally hard and there was a lot of stress over this last week, the orderly response has been pretty impressive from where I have sat and watched it occur. This is a photograph and an in-action shot at the Mayflower. As you can see, the HESCO barrier that we assembled there in a matter of a couple of days, utilizing flood center maps to let us know exactly how long we could leave contractors in that area before the elevating floodwaters would reach the HESCO barrier. It is engaged with the HESCO barrier wall now. It's doing its job. As you can see, it fully surrounds that site. Ultimately, we will create a permanent solution there that will replicate this with a full-size flood wall that will sit in front of the building. It should be noted that Iowa City's project to elevate Dubuque Street, which we are working in full coordination with, and they're involving us in their design efforts, does not protect Mayflower. It elevates the roadway, but has to allow water to pass through because of the rains and the events that could occur on the backside of that. So our flood wall will still be required to make this a permanent protection. And some of the other HESCO barrier wall protections we have along very important buildings that are currently not permanently protected, but will be as we move forward with our recovery. This is the end of my slide, but before we get to questions and all of that, I was urged into showing a clip that I'm often asked, and I think you people are often asked, what has it been like over the last several years putting up with this flood and working with FEMA and the federal government? First of all, it's absolutely been critical that we've had our legislators, local, state, and federal, especially on our major projects. It's become critical for us to push forward with these projects and complete them. But in retrospect, there's a clip that I often show that captures it, at least for me. Now, I don't know, this clip has University of Iowa graduate, Gene Wilder, in it. I don't know if you've seen Young Frankenstein before, but this is the clip that wraps it up for me. Let's see if this, you know technology, but we'll see if this works for you.
What a filthy job. Could be worse. How? Could be raining.
And so has been our life for the last 5 years. With that, I think, Joe, are we to take questions or are you to take questions?
Why don't Larry and Rick and Alan come on up front. We're going to bring the lights up, and we're now ready for a little Q&A for people that might have a question. We'll take questions from the floor. There are cards in the back on the table if you feel like you rather write it down. Because we're on video, we want to make sure we repeat the question. So, if it's a short question, that's always better.
And if it's an easy one.
Before we go to questions, I'd like to recognize Leslie Flynn from the College of Education, who was on the planning committee, did a lot of work around the Teacher Institute. And Senator Dvorsky was here and he had to run off, but he's been a good supporter of a lot of work that's going on. So, Jim Throgmorton, question.
Right, I was wondering, do you have any estimate about approximately how many construction employees would be involved for the university's construction efforts, and where do they live?
It's a great question.
Could you repeat?
Yeah, absolutely. Jim's question is related to workforce and related to how much work we have going on, flood-related and otherwise, on our campus and in our community. And one of those fears, do we have too much work for the workforce? We're an interesting state. We're actually a state that's in a good way with respect to construction activity. We're a healthy state on that front and becoming healthier. There are surrounding states and states around the country that are not, and we are seeing evidence of bidding in our area that are going beyond the bounds of Iowa City. The art building project itself, the recovery project, had 3 Iowa contractors and 4 out-of-state contractors as far away as Georgia bidding on our project. And this is not a surprise to us. It should be known, we have been working in advance of this to try to encourage contractors from around the state that may not be bidding work in eastern Iowa and at the University of Iowa to come here to do this work. We would love to have an Iowan win every bid to every one of our projects. But there's no doubt, as the work is available and may not be in other places, people will come to try to do that work. And by Iowa law, the low responsible bidder for our projects is selected to do that work. There's a great opportunity and some risk related to the amount of work we have going on. The economic development opportunities are immense and can benefit our communities. At the same time, the influx of people that may not have been here before can, if you look at some extreme examples, the Dakotas, with their sort of boomtown development, in those cases, you can end up with fast growth and then people moving out, having more of a transient relationship with the area. And that can be damaging because communities can become overbuilt. And so we are working with Iowa City and Coralville and the Chamber of Commerce to try to take advantage of this and to monitor it as it goes. Again, encouraging Iowans to bid these projects because they are already local. But it's a great question and a great area of interest for us as we move forward over the next 18 months of intense bidding.
I'm a school out, and how do you attract students to Iowa City and a bit people here? And when we got a flood, that was my number one. And how come I just learned today theater building was going to be open, and today I found out it was not going to be open.
Yeah, so the question, two questions. Thank you. One, how do we attract people to Iowa City in the midst of sort of this experience we have with the floods and all of the, if some people could refer to it as a mess going on, and also related more specifically, I think, to the theater building and its closing for the summer. I'll answer the first one with maybe some evidence we saw. It's interesting, you know, when we look back at the 2008 flood and what it did to our campus, what it did to our communities, and where it put us that year, we only have to look to another event, Katrina in the Gulf Coast, where, and it also helps understand the size and maybe something about Iowans and our resiliency. There are 8 universities and colleges in the New Orleans area that were impacted by Katrina. All 8 of those universities and colleges put together did not equal the damage at the University of Iowa. Additionally, they dropped in enrollment at those universities and colleges by roughly 30%, and today are still not back to their pre-Katrina level of enrollment. It absolutely impacted the marketability and the willingness of folks to go to those places after Katrina. The University of Iowa in the fall of 2008 welcomed the largest incoming class in the history of the University of Iowa and did so for the next 2 years after that. Barbara, I think from the provost's office we saw almost no, I want to say in fall of 2008 there were reports of maybe 2 students that had decided and given reason that the floods were the reason they didn't come to the University of Iowa and to our community. I think we are exceptionally resilient. I think we had very patient and understanding faculty and university staff who helped keep a smiling face on this place when it was very difficult in 2008 and 2009, and continue to do so. This has been a long period of recovery, and we were warned by other communities who had endured these kinds of disasters that it would be, and it has, but we are persevering. And to your question about the theater building, all of the buildings on the arts campus, save the Levitt Center, which is high and dry from the flood, have been closed for the summer, and those programs relocated and taken care of in other university settings. And the university was very careful to make sure that web information on the main page at the University of Iowa, which linked to an Iowa Now page. Had very detailed information each day on where we were, because those were tough decisions to decide to protect by vacating those buildings. But that is also the safest way to protect them, to make sure that people are away from harm's way. And there are some impacts to programs, but we've minimized it on our campus and tried to communicate it clearly. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Iowa Flood Center. You've done more to calm their, and in 2008, we operated on rumors, innuendos, and everything. Your stomach would clear up to here. And this time we could look and see what was going on and plan for it.
Great, thank you.
I do have a question for Ray. What are the hydraulic implications for the east side of South Gilbert Street, or, east side of South Gilbert Street upon building the west side berm?
The hydraulic impact of the west side berm is on the order of just a couple tenths of a foot. So it'd be in the neighborhood of this much.
For every what?
I'm sorry.
I mean, you're talking what? I didn't understand the answer there.
Oh, okay. First of all, let me repeat the question.
Thank you.
You're asking about the impact on the east side of the river of the construction of the berm on the west side of the river. Okay. And the impact of that would be in the neighborhood of about 2 to 3 tenths of a foot. So it'd be roughly this amount in there. And the impacts that we experience is roughly the same as what was experienced during 2008 when the temporary berm was in place. Hydraulically, those will function very much the same.
But as I understand, this berm is coming further to the north.
It will go to the railroad tracks, which is how far the berm in 2008 went.
Behind the Plover Supply.
Yes, yes.
Could I add to that? Just to help to understand that a little bit better, the amount of water that gets stored in these areas is relatively small relative to the volume of water that's passing through the river in a cubic feet per second kind of event. And so even though we're protecting these areas, like protecting the arts campus, because those areas do hold some water, but they're not part of the active flowway, there isn't active water flowing through those areas, the impact in terms of water elevation by putting berms up is relatively small. And I do want to just respond to your opening comment. We do appreciate individual citizens that have been able to utilize the flood center maps and information. And I think one of the elements that helped in terms of calming nerves and understanding some of the rumors out there is, that we're an independent voice that can come and meet with neighborhoods or communities or individuals to describe processes. And I had the opportunity to attend a emergency city council meeting in Hills, Iowa last week as they were trying to prepare their flood fight. And there were folks there that were quite concerned about what they might see this year and how that might be different than 2008. And there's still a rumor that sort of persists throughout Johnson County that the reason Hills was saved in 2008 was because of the failure of the levee down by Columbus Junction. And so I told them that wasn't the case, and anybody that had pitchforks and were ready to go to Columbus Junction to fail that levee again, it wouldn't provide any protection to them. So we do try to be an independent source of information and help folks understand some of those difficult things to understand.
I've got a question, and then back to Jim. So 2008 flood happens, and we learn a lot, and a lot of remediation and resiliency is deployed, and then we have this repeat in 2013. Which I assume we're learning some more from. So for Rod and Rick and Ellen, what are 1 or 2 things that you've seen that, we're going to tweak that or tweak this from the recent flooding?
Sure, so quickly I can start. The university had before 2008 a flood emergency response plan. In fact, it was developed after the 1993 flood, and had we had a 1993 flood in 2008, we'd have had no impact to our campus. But we didn't, and it went past that. We have not only made modifications to the campus, but also modifications every year to our flood emergency response plan to address the different changes we've made, incorporate those, and have a plan ready that was enacted in 2013. We put that plan into place based on the information that we received from the Corps of Engineers and Johnson County, and based on our input from the Flood Center and what we were getting from Larry and VTech and their group. There's no doubt as we put that plan together, we did a lot of work, the university did a lot of work, and the contractors working with the university did a lot of work in a 4-day period to fortify the campus. But in that, we learn a lot about what we're doing and about the order of what we're doing and where the organization of plugging inlets for storm drains and when that's done, and when that's done in coordination with a 8-foot wall that you're going to build right next to it with contractors there. We are now going to be, while we're still in a monitoring stage, we have a 24-hour period of monitoring every threatened building around the clock. We report on it each morning to make sure that we're not surprise attacked from beneath with hydrostatic pressures very high right now and fully saturated grounds. But should we get through this summer and see it going in a good direction, we'll have a several lessons learned processes that will allow us to reestablish that flood emergency response plan for the next year. And everything will change with that plan when we have these permanent solutions in place, when each building is fortified by its own system. But we'll continue to monitor, and when we did find things, we will find things that we can do better each time.
Do you want us all to go through? Yeah, sure. Okay. Two things stood out to me this year, and that is, first, the impact of the buyouts. By getting 94 of the property owners out of the floodplain, the sense of urgency as the water rose was significantly less this time around, and that was appreciated by all and allowed us to act very well. And it also, the other thing was the information that we gathered during the 2008 flood allowed us this time around to predict what would flood at what time, and allowed us to organize our response in a very predictable way. And that's an important thing to document for future generations so they don't have to relearn those things.
The thing I would mention is I would echo what both Rod and Rick said, first of all, and then the one primary area we still have left to complete our permanent flood protection is the south side of Clear Creek, west of First Avenue. And even today I was at lunch and we had gone door to door Saturday morning to the businesses in that area and told them, we have this temporary protection in place, and we have all of these the new stormwater pump stations, and we have you protected to a level that we feel comfortable with. And today at lunch, a woman came up to me, and because she had seen some interviews taking place in that area, she was sure that still it was going to flood. And I think there's just such a much better comfort level for all of us with the permanent flood protection, and particularly in an area like Highway 6 where we have this immensely important commercial infrastructure. We have an arterial street that's critical for our connection to downtown Iowa City, which is employment and healthcare and so many other things for so many people, that's just a piece that we really need to make sure that we get completed.
Last week I had occasion to be driving to Kansas, and so across Iowa, and I saw a stunning number of fields collapsed into streams and enormous waterfalls. And so I'm wondering, you all are speaking from an urban point of view this evening, but I'm wondering what the effect of that is on the Iowa River, Iowa's rivers generally, and even on what you all are doing. So what does it mean when that much soil is going into streams and then into the river and then into the reservoir? So I'm looking at you, Larry, because I'm directing it to you in part, but also to the rest of you, wondering what effect this has on what your plans can be.
Yeah, and so I'll respond to that. Barbara's question is, I'll summarize that in terms of, what effects are we seeing from the intensification of rainfall in our watersheds, and in particular in the agricultural areas that we have in Iowa, and how do we try to make the connection with those agricultural damages, and how are they affecting our urban areas. And I think that's one of the things that, at least as we look forward at the Flood Center and IHR, we're really, we went through various phases following 2008. The first one was the immediate response and recovery activities. Then it was trying to get information and technology available to the communities, get the mapping systems and the monitoring systems out there. And over about the last year and a half, we've been working on a project that we call the Iowa Watersheds Project. And that is to focus exactly on this element of how do we start to really take a watershed approach to managing the flood resiliency for Iowa. And this came out of the legislature. It was a pilot watershed project. We were fortunate to receive some CDBG funding for this project through Housing and Urban Development, and just began the project. So we're looking at implementing about $5 million in water holding projects in 3 small watersheds in Iowa, one in the Turkey River, one in the Upper Cedar, and one down in the Silkachee Creek watersheds. In our initial study of this kind of project, we're seeing for a 100-year precipitation event, which is for Soap Creek about 7.5 inches of rainfall over a 24-hour period, that a similar system that's been installed down there was able to reduce the stream flows by 40%. And reducing the stream flow also is looking at benefits to soil quality and holding soils back, because these farm ponds, 132 that were built in that particular watershed, were built with agricultural terraces on the land to hold soils back, to slow the runoff into those farm ponds, to make sure they live their 50-year lifespans. The farm ponds and wetlands held water back as well, but we certainly see that benefit. So about 40% reduction in stream flow for that 100-year precipitation. Now that's one example of what we can do, okay? And that's only one example, and that doesn't really cover the broad spectrum of water quality related issues that you commented on, Barbara. And I've been trying to say to anybody that will listen that there's nobody alive that remembers good water quality in Iowa. In fact, the oldest people, the more senior people in the state, would look back into the 30s and 40s and probably remember worse water quality because the agricultural practices were even worse. And so we've got a long, long ways to go, and this is going to be a multi-generational type of a project. And we've got to somehow work in partnership with agriculture, because the ag economy still is a very important element of the state of Iowa, and we have to respect that, but we have to be respectful to each other and find some balance between agricultural, economic, water, and natural resources. That's a whole nother hour talk, and so.
Yeah, I know it is. If I could just come back with one other question. Is it the case that in an event like we've had in the last 2 weeks, that the amount of soil running into the streams and then into the rivers affects the capacity of the reservoir?
Well, so 2 kind of questions. One is the soil loss and sediment loss that we're seeing today is undoubtedly less than 20 and 30 years ago because of some of the conservation practices that have been installed. Now, with that said, we still, with the intense rainfalls that we saw, Marshalltown, 6, 8, 9 inches of rainfall, we see a lot of sediment coming off of our landscape. That sediment that comes into projects like the Coralville Reservoir or the other reservoirs in Iowa impacts the flood storage capacity of the reservoir if it's above the conservation pool. And this is one of these, again, very sort of difficult things for people to understand, but that big, conical area, that big snow cone or ice cream cone that we think of in the Coralville Reservoir, if that sediment comes in below the conservation pool, it has no impact on the flood storage of the reservoir. In these high reservoir levels that we're seeing right now, we do get some sediment depositing above the conservation pool, but it's relatively a small amount. After 2008, for the city of Coralville, actually in a project working with Kelly Hayworth, we did a reassessment of the Coralville Reservoir. The Corps of Engineers gave us their operational model. They provided that to us. And then we went and simulated the 2008 flows over that 2-month period leading up to the June event and following it under different conditions, different release rates, and different sediment conditions. So we went back and we took all the sediment out mathematically out of the reservoir, and we ran the model again, and the impact in Iowa City was parts of an inch. I mean, really, it was literally very little. Now, an inch, because of that, and an inch because of something else, and an inch because of, yet something else, has a cumulative impact. But sediment isn't the issue that some people have been misunderstanding it to be.
I think something, just to follow up on that, that demonstrates that is today, as full as the reservoir is, up 3.5 feet short of full, it's still only at 73% capacity. So that tells us just how much it does broaden out at the top, that it really, most of the capacity is at the top.
Yeah, so under the conservation pool, there's water, and so you can't add any more water below the conservation pool. So it doesn't matter if it's water, sediment, trees, cars, raccoons, long list of things. So.
Chuck.
Question for Rod. As the projects continue at the university and individual buildings like the Advanced Technology Lab also get an invisible wall and IMU gets protected, are you saying that we will no longer need HESCO barriers? Will they be phased out?
It's a good question. Chuck's question is related to the use of the HESCO barriers or our temporary barricades against an emergency flood situation, and whether or not once we get to the permanent solutions for these buildings we would not need it. One of the self-protective methods we took after the 2008 flood, we had to replace the walkways that had been damaged by the flood on either side of the river. One of the things we found most difficult in 2008 was there was an undulation of elevation related to those sidewalks, and that made it very difficult. We were doing engineering spot shots on elevations every 10-20 feet to make sure that sandbag walls were at a consistent level to protect against certain protection levels or heights of the river. And to repair the sidewalks, to also make those sidewalks more friendly to bicycle and pedestrian traffic, we widened them to our standard of 10 feet. But we also placed them at a consistent elevation. They are all on both sides of the river, placed at 1.5 feet above the 100-year flood level and at a consistent height that allows us two things. One, general protection on a year-over-year flooding event. Something sub-1993, those sidewalk elevations are going to contain the water in the river basin. That doesn't deal with subterranean watershed from individual events or from the water table issues, but overland river issues can be addressed with those walkways. They also serve as the base for temporary emergency protection. If you go now and look at where the HESCO barriers are placed, they're placed right on those sidewalks. Our plan allows for us to put those into play. As I mentioned, buildings like Art Building West and IATA will be protected from overland water flow following their permanent completion. Other buildings like the theater building, the former museum building, the art building or the original art building that will remain, are buildings that will not have formal protection methods. The reason being the damage does not afford a cost-effective method to shroud that building and protect it from water getting into the building. That being the case, though we will modify the flood emergency response plan, they will still need event-by-event protection by us, we believe, or we'll try to minimize the damages to those buildings by doing that. Well, certainly the permanent solutions will impact the severity to which we have to act on in a 4-day period to protect our campus, and we'll see less of that element on our campus, but we won't eliminate it from our campus.
I went to a presentation in Iowa City a couple weeks ago about river restoration, and one of the things they talked about was low-head dam removal, which I had never heard of before.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our low-head dams, I guess there's two on the Iowa River below the Coralville Dam, and one of them is at Burlington. And it's not used for flood control. And I went back and read a couple articles in the newspaper. They talked about the water plant for the university using the dam to raise the water level so that your water plant can take water. And also generation of power for the power plant. So that seems important. But then it seemed as if the dam removal was sort of taken off the table somehow and they started talking about the dam modification and whitewater and so on. But then, as I listen to your presentation and I hear about, let's see, the Gateway project now is 40 million, and that's not yours, that's the city's raising Dubuque. But then we have your 900 million on your construction projects for the university. Then, of course, Coralville has put in a ton of money. So I'm wondering if the dam removal was actually looked at seriously and modeled hydraulically to see if that might, because dams that are not used for flooding, if they are then removed, can actually assist in rivers not flooding so badly, is my understanding. So perhaps areas wouldn't flood that flood now if those two dams were removed. And I just wonder what kind of, lots of studies have been done, but has a study been done on that? And how seriously was that looked at as a flood mitigation?
Yeah, so, and I might turn some of this over to Larry, and I think Iowa City and Coralville may have some answer to this as well. Just to clarify, the roller dam at Burlington Street, one of its, yes, it does have a tie to create a pool that's necessary for the water treatment plant, which is just up north and across from Burlington Street, across Burlington Street from there. That water treatment plant is also critical. In fact, if it went down, we fortified it heavily in 2008 and this year. If it went down, we couldn't operate the power plant, which is the sole power plant for our campus. That tunnel, roller dam, is also the primary steam pathway that serves and provides steam and cooling to the entire West Campus and to the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. So from a logistical perspective from the university, it is as critical as any pathway on our campus for steam. Larry, you might, because you reside right there, might talk a little bit about the hydrology of it and impact.
Yeah, and so.
It is generating the power?
No, it's not generated power. It's carrying it. It's carrying the steam in the tunnel that's going underneath the river to serve the entire West Campus.
So it provides an elevation for the drinking water intake as well as for cooling water for the power plant. So both of the water surface elevation is for that purpose, not for power generation. The other point, to remember is that, in thinking about this, just last summer, the Coralville Dam was reducing its outlet flows to try to maintain the conservation pool. So they were down to or near to minimum releases. And so, it's at that point where that dam was, again, serving its purpose so that the university could draw drinking water or water for drinking water purposes out of the Iowa River, as well as provide that cooling water for the power plant. So just last year, we were at those record lows. We see these large swings. With respect to modeling it, no one has done a very detailed model of that. We did some initial assessments on it. The effect of the dam actually becomes less and less as the river gets higher and higher because it gets overwhelmed. Gets inundated, if you will. And so at 40,000 CFS, the drop, we start to see the downstream side and the upstream side converging, and so there's a relatively small drop across the dam when we get into these very extreme flows. The benefit of removing the dam, again, would be real. I think it would be real, certainly at those flows, but then we've got to balance that against other trade-offs. How do we try to maintain that pool during low flow conditions? City of Waverly.
Is the university not on city water? The university does their own water. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and there's a tie-in across the university to the city. So if we have an excessive need or a failure, we can tie back to the city. I did want to mention, a project up in Waverly, Iowa, where they have a dam and provide similar utility for some projects upstream. They've put an operable bladder, a controlled dam on top of it, so during high flows they can actually lower it to try to pass that water more effectively through there. again, all things are sort of possible. Probably all things can't happen at the same time based on, you know, the number of projects the university has underway at this time. And so, you know,
I'll add to that both dams are important for the Iowa City water supply system. And when we built our new water plant and moved our intake upstream, we actually purchased the dam by the Iowa River Power Restaurant so that we could renovate it and make sure that it stays in good condition, because we rely on that pool from that dam to create water for our pool for our intake, just as the university does with the Burlington Street Dam. The other less obvious benefit of both of those dams for our water supply is that most of our water is drawn from the sands and gravels underneath the Iowa River. And the pool from both of those dams serves to recharge the sands and gravels that we draw from. So that's where they're important.
So it seems like most of the statements made today were based on an attempt to be proactive in terms of future floods. But if you have a moving target, I mean, all of this is assuming that we know where the 500-year floodplain is, and that it's going to be static. If you have a moving target, which is created with climate change, you're going to be constantly pushed into being reactive rather than proactive. So that perhaps, I mean, I'll just be a devil's advocate and throw it to maybe to Larry, but whomever would like to answer this question. If you consider climate change, all of the attempts that you're making are kind of aiming at a moving target and are not going to be, excuse me, meaningful in the long run. And I wonder if people have, if any of you have been factoring that into your considerations.
yeah, so Connie's question and comment is about climate change, and although we're talking about being proactive, are we, more reality being reactive? And I think it is, depending on the time scale that we look at. So, the time scale of the past 5 years, I think most certainly people are being proactive to the types of events that we've seen, but we're all being reactive to climate change. And at least I think those that acknowledge climate change is here and it's happening, we're all being reactive to it. And I think that's part of that new discussion that we have to have. And nothing, to me, is more indicative of the changes that we're seeing as the last 5 years have been. So, we had the 2008 event. We saw significant flash flooding in 2009. We lost the Lake Delhi Dam in 2010. The immense flooding of 100-plus days over flood stage in the Missouri River in 2011, into a drought of our lifetimes, at least, of our memories. We saw a drought last year. I was in a meeting in Charles City about a week ago, in fact, a week ago on Wednesday, and the person leading the meeting held up the Des Moines Register, I think from March 17th. It said, "Drought persists, no end in sight." And so this is March 17th, 8 weeks ago. We were in a drought, and farmers were concerned, would they get a crop this year? Was this going to be an extended 5-6 year drought? I mean, discussions like that were going on, and 2 months later, less than 2 months later, we're fighting this flood again. And so, whether it's climate change, climate uncertainty, what is it? We need to start thinking and talking about this. And so, I would say, unfortunately, we're being reactive to climate change. We're trying to be proactive to what's, the cards that were dealt, but, I think we're failing miserably in terms of taking a long view of it.
A couple points that I would make related to that Iowa City has done is one is with our change of standard from the 1% flood, the 100-year flood, to the 500-year flood, that is the 0.2% chance flood. That puts us in a better position for different trends in rainfall. The other thing that I want to point out is that prevention strategy that I talked about, and that is buying floodplain property before it has the opportunity to develop. Because once that is taken out of that opportunity for development and put into open space, the level of protection is irrelevant, whether the 100-year flood is at this level or this level. And if you recall, looking at those three priorities or three strategies that I mapped out there, of the $138 million spent on those three, the prevention only had $2 million there. And what that tells me is that's really a very cost-effective means of getting at many of these floodplain issues is to prevent them from developing in the first place. And that's a key strategy for us.
And all I'd add to that is, you know, you certainly have a point, but the one constant will be that the existing buildings that are in the low-lying area, and particularly in Coralville, you know, those are our central business district. Those are going to continue to be the areas that need to be protected. And so, at the very least, we've added to the protection. If at some point we have to add to that, we've certainly gotten ourselves a better start.
We've got time for one more question before we break for refreshments and some informal discussion. Chuck?
Rod, so tell me, the city of Iowa City is trying to take buildings out of harm's way. Now, it's a lot easier to do that with individual houses than it is with academic buildings. But the university is also still planning to build buildings in the floodplain. Normally, as I understand it, the extension of the campus recreation center would be built just south of that, right next to the Iowa River.
Mm-hmm.
How can we justify adding buildings into the floodplain, given all that's happening and all that might happen?
Sure. So, Chuck, it's a great question, and to clarify so that others, you've read it so others know, planned for and ultimately constructed prior to the evidence, or designed and then bid and constructed before the 2008 event, the recreation site is within that area. And there's no doubt, both from a master planning perspective and a look forward to other optional projects we may endeavor to do in years to come, in that range of the 500-year is going to change. We do have master planned growth. We have not acted on it, but master planned growth to the south of the Recreation Center for more of a consolidation there. Additionally, there are sites that long before the 2008 were considered active and viable building sites. For instance, west of the main library, what we call parking lot 3. It has, since 2008, been taken off the master plan as a viable site. A lot of people have asked about Hancher, Voxman, Clapp, and that site. That is going to be green space. We have master planned, in effect, what we would call an Iowa River park land adjacent to the river. Anywhere that, the university is a fully urban site, contained fully by its neighbors, and not unlike every peer institution that we compare ourselves to since World War II, we've grown at about 2.5 million square feet per decade. And we're neither ahead or behind that curve on a national level. And with hard or hardening borders, the notion of infill becomes more and more critical. Past generations of planners on our campus and other campuses grew outward. Our master plan is to grow upward, not outward, and to consolidate and to protect the disappearing green environment on our campus with linked hands on places that in the past, every green space, every parking lot was referred to as a future building site, and that is no longer the case. We do look at the river as a different endeavor for us, and how to bring people to it but not bring buildings to it. Does it mean that we have the space to grow forever without thinking about, and I'm not talking about building things on the riverbank, but rather how we address that bridge point between the edge of what would be considered the 500-year flood, and as Connie points out, who knows what the 500-year flood is 10 years from now. It could be a very different thing, and so we all have to look at that. Our master plan has changed since 2008 and will continue to change as we evaluate that, and the recreation center is where it is, but it's future development, and we're not on the cusp of a project to grow to the south. Is certainly certainly something tested that was not before 2008 tested by the master plan. It's one, a great observation, but two, a great challenge as we move forward with less available land, but that doesn't mean we relent and go to the river's bank. I think we've learned from what this Iowa River can do to us, and as is the theme, to live with the river, but not in spite of it.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. Thank you for all the great questions and discussion. I have a couple quick announcements. There will be a disaster preparedness fair that's going to be hosted by the City of Iowa City on Saturday, June 15th from 2 to 3 p.m. There's flyers on the table in back. Also on June 15th at 4 o'clock in the Pentecrest, Preservation Hall Jazz Band will play a free concert for the Johnson County community. There's flyers on the back table. I'd like to thank the Iowa City Public Library and especially the Library Channel and Bond, who has been assisting us tonight. I would also like to especially thank Carol Sweeting, Sarah Stussy for their help in organizing the meeting, and of course, our terrific panel of speakers who've done such a nice job not only presenting tonight, but doing some really good work over the last number of years in making our communities more resilient. Please join me in thanking them. Thanks again for coming. There's refreshments and some informal conversation, so thanks.